10 being utterly free,
Right.
1 being I'm not free at all, you have massive constraints. Where do you feel you are?
I'm a 10 in that my reality is anything I choose it to be. I thought I was going to be a marriage and family therapist. I also felt, I don't know that I want to be in that environment for my whole career. I just eventually, though, landed on, I don't think that's quite right. Well, I went away to Australia for a year.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
You went from working at Deloitte to working with big organizations and consulting, and now you work with a lot more individuals. To you, what's the difference?
I have this somewhere, and it's like I've worked with employee counts from 1 to 10,000 plus.
Yeah.
I say this to one-on-one clients or anyone in a group. It's cruel of you to keep that message in, because if it changes one person's life today, like they need that. And so
That's interesting.
dare to lead, right?
Yeah.
Let's bring in Grant White, portfolio manager,
investment advisor.
Welcome to the Finding Your Wealth podcast. What this whole podcast is about is redefining the conversation around wealth. The whole thing is absolutely a bit of a tire fire, in my opinion. I don't like drama, and this talk is surrounded by drama. Okay, I'm super excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here because, as I was explaining off air, you're the first guest that has known me for a long time, and you know, we've been friends for a long time, and so this is a really fun episode for me to do because of that. And at the same time, it's a fun episode for me to do with you because of the work that you're doing. So Mel Giller.
Mel Grappentine.
Mel Grappentine is how I know you.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm Mel G 2.0 now.
Mel
Melissa
G
Giller.
2.0. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm really excited. I feel like our conversation is a fun blend of like pre-professional life and all the things we learned along the way. I think at the essence of it, though, it's great to see like people like you and old friends who are still so authentic and true to themselves, and how like life just gets better with time.
I think I'm more authentic now than I was, to be honest.
Well, for sure. Yeah.
I don't think I knew, I mean, we're talking like bar days back in the day. So I don't think I really knew what I was trying to do. But,
No.
But yeah, I think I'm more of my real self today than I was then. So I really like to start, given that this podcast is all about redefining what wealth means, and really, especially focusing on wealth being freedom.
Right.
I would like to know, where are you feeling you are today? And we'll put it out of the score. Like, we get everybody to score it out of 10.
Okay.
And I'll tell you how I'm feeling too about my freedom. But
Okay.
So 10 being utterly free,
Right.
1 being I'm not free at all. You have massive constraints. Where do you feel you are?
I mean, how spiritual do we want to go? Because I feel like
you're the guest. As spiritual as you want.
On that basis, I mean, I'm a 10 in that my reality is anything I choose it to be. If I perceive myself as free, I am. And I mean, there's the spiritual perspective. There's also reality. I'm blessed to live in a country and be in a body that is able and free. So to me, I'm a 10 because I literally can choose any direction I want to go from here.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is a different answer than I've heard from most people. That's awesome, though. I really like that. I mean, because I think it really puts like everything into perspective, and especially a day like today. I mean, it's November 5th. There's a big U.S. election going on today, and I think there's a lot of people that are not putting things into perspective in a lot of cases, and so I think that's really refreshing to do that.
And even when you might get a disappointing outcome that wasn't one you wanted, you are still free to choose how you respond to that and how you show up every day. So ultimately, like, I just love to think Earth is a big playground. At the end of the day, we're gonna look back and be like, oh, well, that was silly. And it's just a game.
Probably.
So like, why not make it the best time you can?
This reminds me so much of, and this will be probably one of the many tangents you and I go on, but what you just said reminds me. So I had there's this image, and because I'm a big space nerd and love like space travel and NASA and all that, there's this image called the pale blue dot. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So like the Voyager space probe, as it's zipping out of the solar system, turns around and takes a picture of Earth, right? And it's just this tiny speck,
Right.
tiny dot, speck of dust in like this one like ray of light. And it's like the whole point of it was like to put it all into perspective. It's like, hey, everybody that ever lived and will ever live basically is on that speck of dust,
Right.
floating around the cosmos. So
Yeah.
enjoy,
It's a humbling
enjoy the ride.
perspective.
Yeah.
It's true.
But I think it's also like, to me, like that was like what they were saying. Like Carl Icahn like wrote about it and said, not Carl, like Carl Sagan. There we go. Carl Sagan wrote about it and said like the point was to that it's fragile,
Right.
In what he was writing. But to me, it said like small things can make big differences. And but anyway, you just reminded me of that because of what you just said. So I love that you're a 10. That's awesome. Because I feel like I'm never a 10. I feel like I am pushing for 10. I do think 10 is possible for me. But I like to jam up my schedule with a billion things. And I think that constrains me a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like I'm looking at my schedule this week and it's like, it's fun. It's all good stuff and it's positive. But at the same time, it's like, there's very little choices in there for me.
Yeah. I can relate because, I mean, I say I'm a 10 and I am it ultimately, but I'm also 2 weekends ago waking up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday to do work,
Right.
to get it done. So I have time with my kids later that I'm not taking it out of the weekend, but I'm giving up that rest time. Right. But ultimately I still like to think in the big picture of being a 10, but the nitty gritty is the truth that I said there's the spiritual view and the realistic view in a way, right? Because it's like there is only 24 hours in a day. So how you choose to fill that is your choice. And sometimes it's not your choice. There are things you need to do. It's the reality, or you have people you're responsible for. But again, I mean, don't we want that for ourselves? Like what's the point? Like that's what we signed up for, right? A lot of times I feel like it's kind of, we take this more like victim approach of letting life happen to us.
Yeah.
But they're all decisions we made and we're always allowed to change your mind.
Yeah.
If your work is too much, you can cut back. I mean, you can change what you're doing. You can choose to spend more time with your family if that's what you want. It might mean saying no. That's hard. It's like, it's the in-between part that's the hard part.
Yeah. So,
ideally, it's easy.
yeah. So is that, like when you think about your definition of like again, I'll use true wealth, but to like freedom to me is what it is. And I wrote this down because like I was on your website and Mindful Boss Academy, by the way, and for the listeners. And so I wanted to ask you, what does intentional living mean to you? Because I think that's what you're talking about.
Right.
Is intentional living.
Right. It's letting your core values drive your decisions, essentially. In that, first of all, taking the time to know what those are and really getting to know yourself. So we started this conversation about how you've grown into being more authentic, which I do think is a process of maturing and aging if you're doing it properly. But it's also, some people don't necessarily take the time to sit with themselves or get to know themselves or ask the deeper questions.
Yeah.
I always refer to that type of kind of character as like an NPC walking around, right? Non-player character is like, we're not going deeper.
What is that?
Yeah,
Tell
we're
me
not
more.
going deeper than just like, this is my role, meet me, right?
Yeah.
But that's not satisfying to me and a lot of, I think, other people or high achievers in particular. So it's doing that inner work to know yourself. And in that, making decisions for that life so you're living in alignment with who that is, right? So, yeah, I forget what the question was that you asked.
Well,
but,
like, I was basically keying
wealth,
into, like defining what that means to you. And when I was on your website, I mean, again, like I think this is, looking at the work that you do, I think this is like a key part of the work that you do is helping people define this,
Yeah.
So yeah, like when I was reading about intentional living on your site, I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, like we talk a lot about I talk a lot anyway about being more intentional about the way I want to live my life. I would say that's the biggest difference. I mean, again, knowing me back in whatever year that was.
Right.
And I don't know when that was, 2010? I don't know. What doesn't matter.
I mean, yeah, I graduated in 2003. So between
That's right. So it was like right after high school, basically, when you and I met. So yeah, 2002, 2005, whenever it was.
Yeah.
I would say, so I think the interesting part that I found, and this comes from like reading like things like Simon Sinek and whatever. But once I like started to understand a little bit more about why I do certain things or like what I really want to be, I realized that even back then I was that person.
Right.
I just was probably way less intentional about being
Absolutely. Yeah. And give yourself some credit because the male brain's not fully established till the age of about 22 anyway. So. But yeah, it's like seeing
So
they're
when?
different
22?
22, yeah. Like the prefrontal cortex is the last thing to
How old are
fully
you
develop.
guys?
So it's like
We're
your
breaking the fourth
executive
wall.
functioning. Your executive functioning is the last thing to really like come together. But we're always versions of ourselves, and just like there's still a version of you that's still unfolding, right? And you're going to be different at 50 than you are at 40, and you've had 10 more years of experience in business and parenting and life, right? So I just think it's a journey, and that with compassion for ourselves and our, things along the way that we're like, man, I really messed that up, or I was such a goof back then. We all look back on ourselves with certain cringe moments, right? Yeah. But without that, you have to kind of reframe. How did that help you learn a lesson, and what did that teach you, and how did that shape you into the you are now? Right. It's all part of you, right? And even like our shadow sides and the things that aren't always positive about us, I usually think they're a flip side of some strength in some way. Like they're two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. Not knowing when enough is enough, that's mine. It's like that shows up in my life in multiple ways.
Sure, yeah.
But it also drives me to work really hard.
Awesome. So let's talk about like your path then. Yeah. And how you got into doing what you're doing. So, you've got Mindful Boss Academy. The Alliance, I guess, is kind of part of that, but it's it's a kind of partnership that you've
It's a collaboration.
Well. Yeah. And I know you're teaching at the university as well. So all of those things, like what's led you down to the path to creating these things, especially Mindful Boss, because I think that's your main
for
drive,
sure.
Right?
It's like do you want the long or the short version? Because I feel like when I look back and call it over 20 years, I'm almost 40 myself. So in 20 years of my career, all these little things that I've done have really laid the path to where I am today. I call it following the breadcrumbs. So they're things that maybe lit you up or really stood out to you in your career path, right? Or your journey. So, going back to when I left high school and started university, I thought I was going to be a marriage and family therapist. Like I was going into counseling in my mind, and I was in, psychology was my undergrad, and I was volunteering at doing supervised access visits and things like that. But I also felt, I don't know that I want to be in that environment for my whole career. I don't know that therapy is really a place that, like, I'm interested in it, and I'm very pro mental health, and I just eventually though landed on, I don't think that's quite right. So, I went away to Australia for a year.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when all else fails, just go find yourself.
Right.
And so that part about me though, I have an insatiable lust for traveling. I love to be out in the world and seeing something new. I'm not afraid to do it alone. But it's that curiosity, right? And that drive that's in me. But also I've never been afraid to pause and kind of just like take a step back and reassess. So anyways, coming back from that trip and starting my real career, now I have a degree, and what am I going to do? I started working for the undergraduate medical program at the U of M.
Right.
And so my job back then was setting up the fourth year students with their electives that they were going to do. So I was acting as a student advisor basically in that role. And for me, I took it really seriously because this was the rest of their life. Like if they didn't get that elective placement, that might cost them their residency. Right. That might cost them what they really wanted to specialize in, right? So it was working in consultation with them and helping them kind of build this career that I remember in that job in particular. And that was a big breadcrumb for me. But I also felt that I love working with students. I love working with people, but I want to lead. I don't want to just stay where I am. So that prompted me to look into the MBA. And so when I started my MBA, my career transitioned more to HR. And that's where I just landed kind of opportunity after opportunity, because in that I did that degree over 3.5 years. Like it was a long time doing it part-time and working full-time, but the time was going to pass anyways. And I wanted to have that, for me down the road when I was said and done with whatever stage I was in. And so as it turned out, it was like every couple months or every year I would get this like new opportunity to move up. And so
Was that a tough choice to make, to go back? Because like you were out. Like, yeah.
it was, but I mean, I always knew that I was going to pursue a master's degree of some kind. I love to learn, and it wasn't, when I was in my undergrad, I didn't think business was interesting. Like, I don't think I even really knew, even like you were in commerce though,
Yeah.
but I don't, and a lot of my friends were, but it just didn't seem like meh, to me. I wanted to pursue, and that was the thing. The approach I took with my undergrad was like, I'm just going to study what I like. So I took psychology, sociology, like women's issues, like classics, just like
anything but
like actual stuff that could help me. But I mean, it did, in the sense that it was like I enjoyed what I was learning, and therefore I didn't quit school, and I graduated with a good GPA. So it's like, how is that bad, right? And I can talk about a lot of different things.
Yeah, no doubt.
But yeah, the MBA for me was a chance to really sharpen my skill set as a leader in particular, and get that really well-rounded view of business. I feel like you leave the MBA knowing a lot about every aspect of business. It's not just like, you know, a little bit about a lot of things, you know a lot about a lot of things.
Right, yeah.
And then you're also getting the hands-on experience through work. I mean, that's why I wanted to do it part-time as well, was I'm not going to quit working and stop making money or stop, you know, moving up. I'd rather do this more slowly and leverage that for my, you know, career opportunities. And so when I finished my MBA, I had moved into a role at the time that was created for me, essentially, which was an HR communications consultant was the title of it. But this was in 2014. And for me, this was such a unique blend of, basically my job was to market the human resources department of the university. So that was more of an internal thing, but then it also was external facing for recruitment and things like that. But that's when, you know, businesses using social media was really starting to take off. Yeah. So I had the opportunity then to go to New York for training on using social media. And so it was like using Twitter, for example, which was Twitter back then. Yeah. And so, getting the U of M's HR department on Twitter and other platforms, it was kind of cool, right?
I can only imagine some of the hurdles, though, in like, getting an institution like the U of M on that.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So yada, yada, yada. I left public industry and went to private. Yeah. But that's when I shifted over to Deloitte to management consulting. Right. But it was the blend of kind of learning social skill, like I say social skills, but social media. Yeah. Because that has benefited me in a major way now, right? Right. And then obviously in consulting, that's when I feel like it was the peak of my corporate career. I was, you know, an MBA, working in consulting, working with major organizations here in Winnipeg, you know, flying around the country. I was working with a Big Four firm, and it was very exciting. Right. But I got pregnant. Right. And so with that, I had a lot of choices to make in terms of what I wanted to do with my time and my life. My husband's business, shout out to Smack Pet Food, was really starting to take off. So my husband is also an entrepreneur, as you know. Yeah. They've run their family business now for 17 years. And at this time in our life, they were expanding overseas, and it was really starting to grow. And so, of course, his demands on time were greater than mine. So we chose to, you know, pour into that, and that was going to be, you know, it's a family business. That was our legacy. Mm-hmm. But I was also experiencing a disconnect myself from just the corporate world, and I had this pull to be at home. It was a difficult choice, and that was, I think, one that I didn't realize how much it set off the rest of my life after that. But it was something that also went really against the grain of a lot of other women I knew, was that it was like, what do you mean you're not going back to work? Like, you can do both, you know? I know I can do both. I don't want to right now. I really don't. Yeah. And I mean, that came from a lot of different experiences, but I just didn't feel like staying in that role was right for me.
So that pressure is, I mean, it's interesting to me just because, especially because my wife Sam just went back to work last week after a mat leave, and I think in some ways, like, yeah, like I think she was really anxious about going back, just because she hasn't worked in 18 months there. But anyway, what I'm interested in is that pressure that you felt to go back, or like, you know, like, and like, was that just like from friends, or that was?
You know, most things are from inside yourself. I've come to learn. And what I have learned about myself now, and that was almost, I mean, my son is 8 this week. So this was 8 years ago. What I've learned about myself is that I struggle with rest. And so when you say you've read my website, I talk a little bit on there about like internalized hustle culture and this need to always be productive.
I feel that.
And that when you take a break, it's like you get anxiety, right? If you're not doing it, you're not doing a good enough job, you're not working hard enough. That's amplified, I feel, as a mother, because it's not only, well, one, you don't have a lot of opportunity to rest, but the minute you do, it's like, well, there's laundry, there's dishes, there's a mess, there's like, it's so much other stuff, right? And ultimately, for me, the pressure was this, I couldn't really touch on it at the time, but I think when we talk about wealth and freedom, I always kind of turn it back on women. Like, what if raising your kids is the most important thing you do? Why is that bad? Like could, like, that is one of the most important things you will ever do in your life, moms and dads. But we don't view it as important work. Now, is it everything that you can do to fulfill yourself? No. And that's where I found myself ultimately, was feeling like I had 2 kids, 2 under 2, basically. And with one of them, my second pregnancy in particular, I was very sick for the whole time. And I just felt kind of like a shell of who I was, and not having something outside of motherhood to push me and challenge me was a total loss in my life. And so I faced what I felt was like an identity crisis at the time of, who am I and what am I doing? And so I decided to start a business and figure it out. And so that was in 2019, essentially, when I started. You know, it's interesting when I look back on it. It's like, when, again, going back to that like 20-year-old kid, I'm not going to be a therapist, but I've heard life coaching is cool. I want to be a life coach, but people would be like, what's that? Right? And so to fast forward to 2019, and it's like, okay, thanks Tony Robbins and Mel Robbins and all the like gurus, quote unquote, who no one is a guru, by the way. But life coaching is huge, right? And so there was something in me that, and this is where I think we can circle back to that intentional piece, was I started doing the work and digging on myself to really start to understand who I was in that moment and where I wanted to chart the rest of my course for this time. And so I mean, no stone was left unturned, went through therapy, and like I went to a shaman, studied astrology. I explored everything. I really started listening to myself and tapping into my intuition. And everything was saying, like, you're a guide. You're here to help other people. You're here to share your message. Just start sharing and things will happen, right? And so that's what I did. And I started posting on Instagram that week my experience of motherhood and just like being honest and vulnerable. And that's when an opportunity fell in my lap with a former colleague of mine, or acquaintance from the MBA. Hey, do you want to start this mom's business? So we started an events-based business at the end of 2019. We took off. We were on the news. We were like 3,000 Instagram followers. We were doing so well.
Yeah.
But can you guess what happened?
In 2020, I'm imagining.
Yeah. So
a lot of events.
Were not happening. No. And simultaneously, I decided, you know what, I'm going to do that coaching certification. I'm going to, like my MBA, just work on it right now, and we'll see what happens as this all unfolds. And that was right before COVID started. So by August of 2020, I had my coaching certification. The world was shut down, and I just was like, why not? Let's go.
Sure.
Just try it. So I started, launched what was just like my name, like Melissa Giller at the time, coaching moms, like life coaching, how to feel better about your days, like how to actually have a routine again, how to find yourself in these moments, how to struggle with communicating your needs and your boundaries. And I loved it. Like I was on this high from what I was doing. I felt like even when it was, you know, at that time I had, I don't know, 18-month-old and a 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old. Yeah. So I worked maybe like 2 days a week and one evening. And even if I didn't have clients, I would just like work on my business. And it was it was an escape in a way. And it was a focus that I had outside of my kids.
Right.
And that was everything.
Right.
That was everything. And it really, I feel like I like healed myself through this journey.
I'm interested in, so actually 2 things. You went from working at Deloitte and working with big organizations and consulting, and now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you work with a lot more individuals. And what's that like? What's the difference? Like to you, what's the difference?
Yeah. Well, I think I like to think, I have this somewhere, and it's like I've worked with employee counts from 1 to 10,000 plus.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny because at Deloitte, I did a lot of change management. That was kind of my primary, you know, project role there. And organizational change or individual change is not that dissimilar. There's a lot of things that we work through that are the same.
Right.
And I think too, it's understanding how individuals change that organizations don't always appreciate. And that was the role of change management essentially is teaching different groups, okay, well, this is how people experience change. So how can you get their buy-in to your new system that you're implementing or something like that, right? And so a lot of times in individual change, we also need to get the buy-in of others around us, for instance, of like, oh, you're going to start a business with our credit card.
Right.
Like, okay, you're going to go away for a weekend and work on yourself. Like, how do you communicate your needs in a way that others can buy into them and support you? That's tricky sometimes because I think people can sometimes be tied to you not changing because it helps them stay comfortable, right? And so it's important to also surround yourself by people who break you out of that comfort zone. So why I like working with individuals mostly is because I love to get someone to that breakthrough space on their own. Like my tagline used to be, you know, I hold space for you to break through it, because coaching is a lot of asking questions and listening and letting someone else come to their own conclusion, because the answer is always there. And so in this process, individuals develop self-trust and trusting their intuition. And again, those like core values driving decisions. And I mean, you're really seeing someone self-actualize in that process, which I don't feel I get out of the organizational realm. So for me, I love to deeply focus on one person or a small group of people. I mean, the Alliance, we have small groups, and it's essentially same, like you're coaching, but you're also, I mean, it's strategy. We're getting all of the feedback of the people in the room. I learn and have accountability from those around me. It's a great way for me to get free business advice, essentially from people I respect and admire. But it's this beautiful collaboration, right? Where ideas are flowing and that support is there, as I said, and people also hold you accountable and push you out of that comfort zone. So
it's not really free though. I mean, you're giving. I mean, everybody's giving,
no, it's not free. Yeah, of course not. But it's, I always kind of led by the thought of if what you see doesn't exist, create it yourself. And so I've been hoping that comes across in the things that I offer. You know, there's a lot of business coaches who the model is to move from one-to-one into group, and that's how you scale. I just don't think that's necessary. You can still earn a very good living doing one-on-one coaching. There's other revenue streams for sure, and it's all in your model, but I never want to lose that because I think it's so beneficial to people. Like, some people don't want to be in a group. Some people just want to have that one person that's like supporting them and holding their hand.
Yeah, totally. I think this came up actually when we were at like you invited me to your class a couple weeks ago. This concept of, and you kind of touched on it as well, like the pressure to do something, or the pressure to always be hustling, or the pressure to do more and bigger. What do you think about that, and how has that influenced the decisions you've made and how you've like built your business? Like, do you ever feel, I don't want to put it that way. It's like, do you ever feel like there's too much pressure on people to like, you got to create a Facebook or something like that, you know, especially as entrepreneurs?
For sure. I mean, there's again, there's pressure and there's reality. You can't grow your business in a vacuum. You need to get out of your office behind your screen. You do need to talk to people, but how you do that is up to you. So if you're someone who wants to be on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and you enjoy that sort of thing, wonderful. There's space for that. I enjoyed it at first. Over the last few years, not so much. I find it's kind of been done for me. And so I myself thrive much better in networking opportunities, or just like focusing on your network, growing relationships, and that in turn grows your business, growing more of a like word of mouth referral based business.
Right. Yeah.
And you can do that without a website even. I mean, you don't need a lot of the things that people say you need, but you also can't just wing it. Right. You need a little bit of a plan, right? And so you can do it simply. And I think one of the things that I learned, and I was forced into learning, was, and I feel too, it's like, why I say I know that getting past this like productivity equals value thing is my mission in life, because I keep getting the opportunity to live it out.
Right.
I tore my ACL in 22 and was like forced to shut down basically that whole summer because it was totally an unexpected injury. Like, it blew my life up. And then, I mean, I had, my youngest wasn't even in school yet. So I had 2 very small children at home. Then, of course, I had knee surgery 10 months later. All the while, you have to be going to physio and doing your workouts and really focusing on yourself. And so I couldn't grow my business necessarily as fast as I wanted to at certain times of my life. And so it's almost getting comfortable with like, this is okay. This is enough. Like, done is better than perfect sometimes, right? And that, but also trying to narrow down what can I do to still move the needle, right? And there are certain things that are higher leverage actions than others. Like posting on social media wasn't really it, but having my own podcast for a year, that was wonderful, right? That really grew my audience, really grew my expertise versus like the same old post over and over again. So like not being afraid to try something different. Yeah. But then like, again, it's like pick one thing and have a plan.
Yeah. So you coach solely women?
Yes.
Why only women?
Because I'm free.
Was that out of a need that you saw for women needing more people like you? Or is that more of a personal choice?
It's a bit of both, I would say. I mean, I know a lot of women. I relate well to women. And I think because my business started focusing on the mom aspect of things, that's where I became known. What I do deeply understand, though, is this balance that women in particular have to face on having and raising children, particularly if you become unwell during that time. I mean, like, a woman's body operates totally different from a man's, right? And even like when you're not pregnant, but like in these years of your 30s to 40s, your body's still going up and down, all sorts of different changes. I mean, we're never the same. And so there's not a lot of people, I feel, that appreciate the delicate balance of the mental load we carry, the caregiving aspects that we have to face. And that's also upwards too, generationally, like sandwich generation. And then the reality is, like, we need a 2-income household for most of us these days, right?
Yeah,
so yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure on women still to do it all, be it all, as we've been kind of like programmed to. But it's also, I feel, letting go of the perfectionism that's tied to that, in that you can do it all in the sense that you have to.
Sure, yeah.
Right? But that might, like, it's okay if you order pizza. And it's okay if you work late one night, or it's okay if you call in sick and stay in your pajamas and keep your kids home for a day too. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
do you think that's so? Like, speaking of like the societal pressures, if you will, that are in particular, because I would agree with you. I mean, I think there's like way more pressure on women to be something. Like this prototypical, or whatever you want to call it, woman that can do it all. And now you add on that, like, there's the pressure that you can do more than just like what you were doing before. Right. And you should do more. And like you were talking about earlier about like the pressure to go back to work, perhaps, or whatever it is. Do you think that is changing at all right now? Do you think that, and what I'm getting at is, do you think that people are starting to be a little bit more compassionate towards themselves around this? Or do you feel like we still have a long way to go?
I think there's a long way to go. I mean, I like to shift the conversation to defining what success means to people, because I think when we can do that, then we naturally start to see, running a business doesn't mean you're gunning for $1 million revenue goal. Like, I'm simply not. I'm looking to run a business that feels good, that I love the work that I do, that I can pay my bills with, and, have money left over to travel with or something like that. But I'm not also in the process of burning myself out trying to reach some goal that I should have, because I'm a female-owned business. Right. And there's still this pressure of, oh, you're an entrepreneur. Like, when did you crack 6 figures? When are you going for $1 million? It's like, no. First of all, it's not a business.
I agree, because I see a lot of that talk, especially on like social media.
Yeah.
I mean, Instagram is loaded with that, when it's like people are talking about like 6-7 figure businesses.
Right.
I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like,
right.
And it's never defined anyway.
And it's like, but what are your costs? That doesn't even mean what you're taking home. I mean. Like, it's it's irrelevant.
I've sold my multi-million-dollar business. I'm like, okay. Yeah. Really?
Did you also go bankrupt in the process?
Well, anyway, and the point is, like, there's like, people are like showing, like, it's just a lot of show, and that places so much more pressure on other people, I think.
Yes.
So,
right.
Anyway. Yeah.
But yeah, if you like, I'm in a season right now where I make breakfast and lunch, and my kids are sitting at the table, right? Yeah. And they go off for their day, and I get to exercise at the time of day that I don't want to do it at 5 a.m. I don't want to do it at 5 p.m. Like, I pick the time of day that works well for me. Yeah. I get to do that. I get to work doing work I love for the majority of that day and pick them up from school.
Right.
Like, that's living the dream, in my opinion, right now in the season I'm in, because I can't change the fact that my kids are 6 and 8, and that's what's demanded of me right now. Right.
So that kind of goes into like does freedom change? Like, freedom, I mean, I think it certainly has to. I mean, like, freedom today, kids are 6 and 8.
Right.
There's limitations on that. Like, my kids are 4 and 1.5.
Yeah. And you're tired today.
I can't, exactly. I can't control that my 1-year-old doesn't know what the time change is all about, and she's going to get up at 4 a.m. today, you know? So am I going to like complain about being tired? Probably a little bit, and I'm going to drink a million coffees, but at the end of the day, I mean, like, I can still live a version of freedom today.
For sure. You get to choose. You get to choose if you let it ruin your day, or it's just, I mean, a part of it that, what's the alternative? You don't have that baby waking you up. I mean, that would be a major piece missing in your life. So
totally,
it's gratitude in a way. Sometimes I find, like, when we're in that place, like, gratitude is the one thing that can pull you back and looking around. And also, again, it's like, just look around at the world when you think. There's this saying my grandmother used to have, that if all the neighbors put their dirty laundry out on the street, like on the clothesline.
Yeah.
You take yours back in, right? When you see everyone else's problems and they're kind of like airing their dirty laundry,
what?
right? Yeah, I know. It's like, this is the way she used to
That's
talk.
actually a
but
really good analogy.
yeah, like you have a little bit more gratitude and perspective from what you're dealing with, because again, your issues and challenges are meant for you in some way.
Yeah.
They're meant to shape you into
I love that.
your next version.
Do you feel, I just had this conversation recently, like this weekend, about social media, and we know that we only see like the highlights really of people's lives. Do you think social media is a net positive or a net negative, or in between right now?
It's in between, because again, you have the power to what you consume. I think social media is the same as food and air and water, in that you're consuming it. It's energy. So if you are following things that inspire and motivate you, wonderful. If they put you into a place of comparisonitis and not enoughness, probably not great.
Which I think a lot of people are. I mean,
Then get out and do something else. Like, I think it does become such a comfort tool and a habit, right, to just get on your phone and scroll. But so much life happens offline. Just go outside for 5 minutes. Or, I mean, I'm a big meditator, and like, just having white space in your mind, that's the greatest gift when our minds are so overwhelmed as it is. So I just find social media, I mean, again, it's like, it's what you make of it, but you have to have boundaries with it. It's not a free-for-all.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's hard though. I mean, it's like any addiction, or like, I mean, this stuff is like, what's like food? I mean, food is like designed to make us addicted to certain things. Right? And I think social media, you look at TikTok, like I don't use TikTok.
I'm not on it at all.
I have an account. I've gone on it before, and it's like, this is like the most addictive app I think ever created. And people, you just know, are just like, we'll be there consuming for hours. What do you think is the biggest constraint getting in the way of people finding that level of freedom in their lives at different stages, like whatever it is? But like, what do you think is getting in the way?
What do I think is getting in the way? I mean, a lot of us, I think, again, are happy to be comfortable. And the reality is, I mean, we'll tie into what you do. It's hard, financially speaking, for a lot of individuals to take risks, right? I mean, it's getting better. Like interest rates are going down, for instance, right? So that's helpful. But, you know, the cost of housing, for instance, and the cost of groceries, like, we need money.
Yeah.
So it can be difficult for the person who maybe feels stuck in their career to be like, I'll just start working for myself and bust out of this, because that's not the reality. It does take a while to grow a business, and you're not seeing those returns necessarily right away. So then it's make a career move potentially, right? Well, that has its own, I feel like, again, there's a lot of, and for women, it's imposter syndrome, or feeling this need that, you need more education in order to apply for something. I think a lot of people, the challenge is, again, feeling stuck, and that they can't bust out of something. But what I would like to stress is, again, it's like, if you baby step your way there, things can change in a short amount of time. Like, things can greatly change in a short amount of time. So even if you take out a year's perspective, if every day you did one little thing that worked towards your goal, that's 365 like actions that you've taken, right? So if you're trying to, get into a different type of work, or meet someone new, you're like, start running, right? You have to baby step it. It doesn't happen overnight, but people are afraid of being uncomfortable, I think.
I think you're right. I mean, I explored this on a previous episode where we were looking at like all the constraints that could get in the way. And I did this with Dr. Jason Brooks, his friend of mine, who's a performance psychologist. But he was talking about, like, we were talking about all the different constraints, and actually like financial constraints, although they are there, certainly. I mean, you're right. You need money to do a lot of the things that people want to do. But that's like it's like almost like the easier part in my mind. It's like, it's just math at the end of the day. And
right.
It's like,
making decisions.
Yeah, like, you know, we can figure out quite easily. It's like, hey, if you want to do this in 10 years, here's how much money you should put away every month to do it or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's the intentionality of doing that. And this is obviously like a theme around this episode because, like, you know, this is something you talk about all the time, but like the intentionality, of pushing to that comfort through that outside of that comfort zone, I guess. And I think, like, you know, I saw something recently where it's like, if you want to start doing something, don't wait till Monday to start. Like, start on Friday or start on whatever, or start in the winter. Like, you know, you want to start running or you want to run a marathon. Well, in Manitoba, the marathon runs in June. Like, you should start, you have to literally start training in the wintertime, which is not easy to do in Winnipeg in the winter. But those are the types of things that you need to do if you want to do those things.
Right.
I've always found, like, that I find freedom when I push through a perceived limit, because on the other side of whatever that limit was, it's like, wow, I can do anything. If I can get through this, I can do anything kind of feeling.
Yeah.
So, but those are hard. Admittedly, that's a hard thing to do.
For sure. I love that perspective because, I mean, with anything too, it's like you can hack your way if you play these kind of games with yourself. And I mean, if you say, like, I'm just going to do it for 10 minutes, right? And then you kind of go for 10 minutes and you think, oh, I could go another 10, right? And you realize, like, I'm the only thing standing in my way,
right? Which
is most of the time. So, and what you were saying too about the lack of, or like the financial constraints, it was reminding me something that I teach in my course actually is that typically entrepreneurs are trying to solve, it's either lack of money, lack of time, lack of skill, lack of access, right? I'm trying to solve lack of energy for people. And I think that is something that we don't appreciate enough, is that, like, you can't just do everything or like pour equally into all these different buckets of your life. And some weeks, some days are going to be more focused than others, and trying to really understand, like, what is the key piece in my life that I want to move forward. And maybe it is that you want to run that marathon, and that's okay, right? But
I also, like, really, I want to make it clear though too, and I've just been thinking about this more recently too, that you don't have to run a marathon to be like a runner.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the same in anything. You don't have to.
I would never run a marathon.
Well, no, and that's not for everybody. And I know some people have to do those things in order for them to feel satisfied. But I think it's like, to your point, it's like, hey, if you don't currently work out or you don't currently like run, go for 10 minutes. Like, don't feel like you got to go 26 miles to be considered, I'm a failure until I run that.
Absolutely. I did 25 minutes on my elliptical yesterday and texted my friend, like, I'm winning, because I haven't worked out on a Monday in months. It's like I got into a pattern of, like, I teach on that day, and it's just like I stopped doing it that day. And then for me, I'm like, that 25 minutes was like a huge win.
I really do think, like, people need to have more compassion for themselves in that. And because there is a lot of, like, again, like, social media, I think this is the bad side of it, where it's like everybody posts about, like, the New York Marathon, for example, because I follow some running accounts, and it's like, like, I immediately feel like I need to go out and do something because these people just ran a marathon. Comparisonitis, right? Exactly. Along your journey, have you had mentors that have, like, helped to guide you along the way?
For sure. I mean, I'll have to plug my dad because he's a big force in my life.
He's also a mentor to me. Mostly for partying.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, he doesn't always get what I do because it's very different from the traditional path that he followed, right? But he's just someone who, regardless of that, has my back. And, like, I look to him for, it's his life perspective that really guides me more than anything else. But I mean, I've also had, like, lots of people that I've learned from. Did you ever have Reg Litz teach you?
No, I don't think so.
So I had the pleasure of him being not once but twice a prof of mine in the MBA, and he's since passed away, right? But his teaching on ethics in business was like, I remember those courses more than anything else, and I just felt like he had such a deeper understanding of people and the way that we influence others in our leadership. And then, I mean, I did a year-long coaching program with a coach out of Ontario, who I really respect. She has a big podcast. I've learned a lot from her. And I mean, I like to think more recently too, surrounding myself with other entrepreneurs, those who I'm really close with, obviously, and have collaborated with. But then, as I said, the women in the alliance, they give me mentorship back, even, and it's such a beautiful exchange because we're always learning from each other. And I feel like, as I said, like being that lifelong learner, I love to absorb other people's energy and their messages and have that kind of inspire me. And you take what fits and leave the rest.
Yeah. I love that two-way street in mentorship, which people often like forget about or ignore, because like, you know, I talk about it around Endeavor a lot because, you know, theoretically I should be mentoring a lot of people around here, and I think that happens. I hope it happens. But I learn just as much from them all the time. And I just had this conversation with a student at the U of M where we were looking to hire co-op students, and that was one of the questions they asked is like, you know, what's the coaching and mentorship like? And the exact answer I gave was, it's a two-way street. Like, I hope to learn as much from you as you learn from me.
Oh, for sure.
And that's why I love like groups like the Alliance, because I think that's what it's all about. Like, yeah, you might organize it or help to organize it,
right?
But you're going to get just as much out of that group.
Oh yeah,
as they will.
And even like it's the one-on-one clients that I have too. I mean, I feel like every single woman I've worked with one-on-one, they have a piece of me. Like, they've changed my life for the better in some way. Everyone has a story. I've watched from the, you know, day they come in on their first call to when they end their program eventually. It's such a transformation, and knowing how their story has shaped them. And even, you know, gaining inspiration from, I have a rural client. She's in her 50s and she's starting a business. She went back to school for nursing in her 40s. Like, it's just like, wow. I mean, I love hearing about these stories, and how, you know, to have a little like involvement in that is wealth you can't put money, like a dollar figure to. Right?
Yeah. Is impact a part of like your freedom? Like having that impact?
For sure.
Yeah.
I kind of said from the beginning, I'm like, if I help one person, I'll die happy.
Yeah.
And I know I've helped more than one person. Yeah. So it's like getting that feedback too from people, and whether they are a coaching client or just come to one of the events. Like, I do this full moon mixer out at my home.
Yeah.
And it's such a lovely evening, and just having people kind of look at you in that moment and be like, I needed this.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's everything to me.
I think about that a lot for myself, and like the work that we're trying to do as well. And I see that in the work that you're doing. I mean, you think about, I talk a lot about exponential impacts, because like I can help one person, but that one person will go on and help their family, and they'll help their friends, and so on and so forth. And like the work that you're doing, I mean, if you help somebody be more intentional essentially about their life that they're living, and like whether it's whatever their goals might be, I mean, you think about how many lives that impacts.
The ripple effect, I call it.
Yeah. I love that. We actually did the math not that long ago, because I was trying to inspire a group of advisors. Like, there was like 600 advisors from across the country, and I was trying to explain to them the reason why we share so much of like our playbook, or the way we do things, if you will, is because, you know, as an individual, I can probably impact, like as an individual advisor, I can probably impact about 500 to 700 lives, you know, between clients and their families and friends. But if I can help, 10 advisors or 15 advisors in every city across the country to do that, I mean, the number becomes huge in terms of like the impacts that we can have. Now, I say that with a grain of salt, because not everybody wants to go and do that type of work. It's a lot, but you know, whether you intend on working with, you know, your individual practice or helping to work with other practitioners, the impacts you can have are amazing.
Yep. It's huge. And again, it's like, even from the smallest thing of like putting out an Instagram post, and when people doubt their message, I say this to one-on-one clients, or, you know, anyone in a group setting too, if we're talking about this, but it's like, it's cruel of you to keep that message in, because if it changes one person's life today, like, they need that. And so
that's an interesting viewpoint.
Dare to lead, right? Be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Share what you have to share.
So there's a line in one of my favorite quotes, which is, you don't serve the world by acting small. That's the line in the quote. But that's something that's driven me, is like, you know, other people get uncomfortable sometimes around bigger dreams, or people that put themselves out there. But you don't you can't serve the world by acting small.
Right.
So that's what that reminds me of as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And why does that make people uncomfortable? That's for them to dig into.
Yeah, that's not your fault. So just before we close things off, and this has been a lot of fun already, do you have any advice you'd like to give to our listeners? And I'll make this a two-parter. And are there any resources that you would share with them?
For sure. I think the advice that I would give, and it hinges on a lot of what we've said, is just start. Just start. If there's something that you're desiring, and maybe you don't, we'll backtrack a minute. If you don't know what your next step is, feel into that. Like, I can't urge people enough to, again, make that intentional time and space to listen to themselves and to really ask themselves, what do I want? You know, close your eyes and visualize the next couple years unfolding for you. What matters most? And then start working towards that, even if it's like to have a better marriage, if it's to, start this new opportunity. You don't know where things are going to lead necessarily. So just start developing that, unfolding it. It's the messy middle, as I like to call it, but get messy. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Any books or podcasts or anything like that you'd recommend?
So
other than your own?
Yes. Well, I don't have a podcast anymore, but it was really good. No, actually, one of the books that and it's not a business book, it's one of the books that really set me off on my journey. It was called Light is the New Black. It's by Rebecca Campbell. And it's really about that tuning in and figuring out what lights you up, because I just feel that when you're doing that, the rest of your problems start to solve themselves. Like when you're pursuing happiness and joy, I feel that's where we operate best from a place of, right? So it's like, you're going to find new opportunities or new pathways when you're coming from a place of joy, right? So I really recommend that book. And then if you are in business and wondering maybe where your business is challenged or stuck or stagnating, I recommend taking my quiz, which is brand new.
Awesome.
That just launched a couple weeks ago. And I'm really excited about it because what it does is it illuminates a planet that's in retrograde. So we're pulling in different like astrological concepts with business and personal development. And that's on my website. So you can find that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, we'll share your website.
Yeah.
And especially for our women entrepreneurs that are listening, so that they can check you out. And who knows, maybe they'll be future Alliance members.
I
as
hope
well.
so.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would be great. Sorry,
Mel,
you can't come.
I know. All these great groups are just for women. But that's okay. I guess men have had a good time.
Yeah, I'd say so. There's got to be a boys club around here somewhere.
Yeah, I think there's a few. Mel, this has been so much fun.
Thank
you. We could talk for hours, but nobody would listen to us for hours. I don't
Probably
think,
not.
so.
The conversation would eventually devolve.
Yeah.
Just weird inside jokes.
But thank you so much for this. And we'll share where people can find you, because I think we want people to find you, especially after this conversation.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for joining us.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks, team.